The bruise on Miriam Fletcher's cheekbone had faded to a sickly yellow by the time she pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the general store, one trembling hand smoothing down the oversized work shirt that concealed the gentle swell of her belly beneath. September 1882 had brought an early chill to Centralia, Washington, and the timber town bustled with loggers preparing for the hard work of winter, their voices carrying across the muddy Main Street as Miriam calculated how many more weeks she could hide what grew inside her before the world discovered her secret, and the man who called himself her husband discovered she had tried to run. She had not expected to see a cowboy in a logging town, but there he stood across the street, tall and sun-weathered in a way that spoke of open ranges rather than dense forests, his chestnut horse tied to the post outside the saloon. His hat sat low over his eyes, but something in the way he carried himself made her think of safety, though Miriam had learned the hard way that her instincts about men could not be trusted. Her fingers found the coins sewn into the lining of her sleeve, the money she had been stealing in pennies and nickels for 3 months, and she knew it would not be enough to get far. "Miriam!" The voice cracked like a whip, and she flinched before she could stop herself. Victor Fletcher strode toward her from the direction of the logging office, his face red with drink though it was barely past noon. "I told you to stay at the house. What are you doing in town?" "We needed flour," she said quietly, making herself small the way she had learned to do. "And salt." "I will decide what we need." His hand closed around her upper arm, fingers digging in hard enough to leave new bruises atop the old ones. "You think I do not notice you sneaking around. You think I am stupid." Miriam kept her eyes down, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had not told Victor about the baby, had not spoken of it to anyone. He had made it clear in 100 violent ways that he considered her his property, and she knew with cold certainty what would happen if he discovered she carried a child. He would use it to chain her to him forever, or worse, he would beat it out of her the way he had beaten the hope and light from her eyes over the past 2 years. The cowboy had turned at the sound of raised voices, and Miriam felt his gaze on them even as Victor dragged her toward the wagon. She stumbled, and Victor's other hand rose, and she braced herself for the blow that would come regardless of who watched. But the strike never landed. "Sir, I believe the lady dropped something." The cowboy's voice was measured and calm, but there was steel underneath the courtesy. He stood close enough now that Miriam could see his face, clean-shaven and honest, with eyes the color of creek water in summer. He held out a handkerchief, though Miriam had dropped nothing. Would not want her to lose anything important. Victor's grip loosened fractionally. His pride would not let him appear brutal in front of a stranger, no matter how much whiskey burned in his blood. "Mind your own business, Drifter. Name is Franklin Rowe, and I always make it my business when I see a man handle a woman rough." Franklin's voice remained pleasant, but his stance had shifted, weight balanced like a man ready for trouble. "Seems to me a lady deserves respect, especially from the man who vowed to cherish her." The words hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. Miriam saw the rage build in Victor's face, saw his fist clench, but Franklin did not move, did not reach for the gun at his hip, simply stood there with an expression that promised consequences if Victor chose violence. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Victor released Miriam's arm with a shove that nearly sent her sprawling. "She is my wife, and how I treat her is no concern of yours." Victor spat the words like poison. "Come on, Miriam, we are leaving." She followed because she had no choice, climbing into the wagon with Victor's hand at her back, pushing too hard. As they pulled away, she glanced back once and found Franklin still watching, the handkerchief folded in his hand, his expression troubled. Something in that look, made her throat tight with an emotion she could not name, something dangerous like hope. The cabin Victor had built sat 3 miles outside town, deep enough in the timber that no one would hear if she screamed. He said nothing on the ride back, but his silence was worse than his shouting, pregnant with the violence to come. Miriam kept her hand pressed against her belly, feeling the small flutter of life that had begun just last week, and she prayed to a God she was no longer sure listened. When they reached the cabin, Victor unhitched the horse with movements made clumsy by drink and fury. Miriam hurried inside, hoping to make herself invisible, but he followed her through the door and caught her by the hair before she could reach the kitchen. "You looked at him." Victor's breath was hot against her face, reeking of whiskey. "You looked at that cowboy like some kind of whore." "I did not, I swear, The back of his hand caught her across the mouth, splitting her lip. She tasted copper and fear. "Do not lie to me." Another blow, this one to her ribs, and Miriam curled around her middle, protecting the secret life there with her body. 2 years I have fed you, clothed you, given you a home, and this is how you repay me, flirting with strangers. "Please, Victor, please." "I did not." But her words dissolved into cries as he hit her again, and she could only cover her belly and pray he did not notice. Pray he did not discover what she hid. Eventually his rage exhausted itself, as it always did, and he left her crumpled on the floor while he stormed back outside, probably to find another bottle. Miriam lay there as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, cataloging her injuries. Bruised ribs, split lip, a knot rising on her temple, but her belly felt unharmed, the small life within still fluttering. She was 4 months along now, and soon it would become impossible to hide. The oversized shirts and careful posture would not disguise her condition much longer, and when Victor found out, he would either lock her away like an animal or beat her until she lost the baby. Perhaps both. She had to run. She had to leave tonight, before he sobered up enough to watch her closely again. The money in her sleeve would buy a stage ticket to Portland, maybe, or Seattle. Somewhere far enough that Victor could not find her, somewhere she could start over with her baby and build a life that did not taste of blood and fear. When darkness fell, and she heard Victor's snores from the bedroom, Miriam moved quietly through the cabin, gathering what little she could carry. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the coins from her sleeve. She took bread and cheese from the pantry, wrapped them carefully in a cloth. Her hands shook so badly she could barely tie the bundle closed. The front door opened with a creak that sounded loud as a gunshot in the stillness, but Victor did not wake. Miriam stepped out into the September night, into air that smelled of wood smoke and coming rain, and she ran. The road to town was rough and rutted, barely visible in the moonlight, and she stumbled more than once, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might tear free from her chest. Behind her, the cabin remained dark and silent, but she imagined she could hear Victor waking, could hear him coming after her with murder in his eyes. She had made it perhaps a mile when the rain began, cold and steady, turning the road to mud that sucked at her boots. Her clothes were soaked within minutes, plastered to her skin, and the swell of her belly became more obvious with every step. She pressed on, knowing that to stop was to die, knowing that somewhere ahead lay Centralia and the possibility of escape. The horse appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream, its rider a shadow that resolved into Franklin Rowe as he drew closer. He wore a long coat that shed the rain, and his expression beneath the brim of his hat was concerned. "Mrs. Fletcher." He dismounted in one fluid motion, moving toward her slowly, like approaching a spooked animal. "Madam, what are you doing out here in the rain?" Miriam backed away, her bundle clutched to her chest. "Do not stop me, please. I have to get to town." "I have to," her voice broke, and she hated herself for the weakness. Franklin held up both hands, showing he meant no threat. "I am not going to stop you, but you are going to catch your death walking in this weather. Let me help you." "Why?" The word came out harsh, disbelieving. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "Because it is the right thing to do," Franklin said simply. "And because I saw how he treated you today. I saw your face." He took a step closer, and in the dim light she could see the honest worry in his eyes. "If you are running from him, you need to run farther and faster than you can manage on foot. Let me take you to town. No strings, no expectations, just one human being helping another." Miriam wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she needed no one, but her legs were shaking with exhaustion and fear, and the baby fluttered again, reminding her that this was not just about her anymore. She nodded, and Franklin moved to help her onto the horse, his hands gentle and impersonal, carefully not touching her anywhere that might be improper. He mounted behind her, his arm around her waist to steady her, and Miriam stiffened at the contact. "I am not going to hurt you," Franklin murmured, his voice close to her ear. "I promise you that. I am just going to get you somewhere safe." They rode through the rain in silence, and Miriam felt the warmth of his body at her back, the solid strength of his arm holding her secure. It had been so long since anyone had touched her without cruelty that she had almost forgotten what gentleness felt like. Something in her chest cracked open, just a little, letting in a sliver of light. When they reached Centralia, the town was dark and quiet, the honest folk already asleep. Franklin guided the horse toward the boarding house at the edge of town, and Mrs. Chen, the proprietor, answered his knock with a lamp in hand and irritation on her face that transformed to concern when she saw Miriam's condition. "Merciful heavens, child, what happened to you, Mrs.?" Chen ushered them inside, her small hands fluttering with agitation. "Franklin Rowe, you had better have a good explanation for bringing me a soaked woman in the middle of the night. She needs a safe place to stay me." Franklin's use of her first name suggested they were old friends. "Her husband is not a kind man, and she is running from him. Can you keep her here just for tonight? I will pay for the room." Mrs. Chen studied Miriam with sharp eyes that missed nothing, including the bruises and the way she held her body. "You do not need to pay me for doing what is right. Come, dear, let us get you out of those wet clothes and into bed. You look ready to collapse." Miriam followed Mrs. Chen up the narrow stairs, glancing back once to see Franklin standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat. He nodded to her, a small gesture of reassurance, and then he was gone into the night, and she felt his absence like a loss. Mrs. Chen provided dry clothes and a warm meal, fussing over Miriam with the practical kindness of a woman who had seen trouble before. She did not ask questions, did not press for details, simply made sure Miriam was fed and warm and safe. When Miriam finally lay down in the narrow bed, she should have felt relief, but instead she felt only terror. Victor would come looking for her in the morning. He would tear the town apart to find her, and when he did, he would kill her. She must have slept, because she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices below. Her body ached in a dozen places, and when she touched her face, she could feel the swelling around her eye and mouth. She dressed slowly, carefully, and crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "Cannot just keep her hidden, Franklin. He is her legal husband. He has rights." That was the sheriff's voice, heavy with reluctance. "Rights?" Franklin's voice was hard as iron. "The man beat her bloody. Look at her face and tell me he has rights to anything except a jail cell. You know as well as I do that a man has the legal right to discipline his wife as he sees fit." The sheriff sounded weary. "I do not like it any more than you do, but that is the law. If Victor Fletcher wants his wife back, I cannot stop him from taking her. Then the law is wrong. Franklin's words rang out clear and definite. And if you will not protect her, I will. Do not do anything stupid, son. Victor has friends in this town, men who work for him at the logging company. If you cross him, you will make enemies. I have had enemies before. Franklin's tone suggested the conversation was over. Is she awake? Miriam retreated from the stairs, her heart hammering. She heard Franklin's boots on the steps and turned to face him as he appeared in the hallway. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with the lean build of a man who lived in the saddle, and his eyes held a gravity that suggested he had seen hard things and survived them. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough." Miriam crossed her arms over her chest, trying to hold herself together. "You should not get involved in this. Victor will hurt you if you stand between him and what he considers his property. Let him try." Franklin studied her face, and she saw something in his expression shift, a decision being made. "Mrs. Fletcher, Miriam. Just Miriam. Miriam, then. I am not going to let him take you back to that cabin. I do not care what the law says. But you need to understand that staying in Centralia is not safe. Victor will come for you, and the sheriff cannot protect you if he does. You need to leave, go somewhere he cannot find you." "I have $43, Miriam said quietly. "That is not enough to get far, not far enough." Franklin was silent for a moment, his gaze searching hers. "I was heading south when I stopped here, down to Oregon. I have a job waiting for me at a ranch near Bend, working as foreman. The pay is good, and the ranch is big enough that they always need extra hands." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I could take you with me. As far as the world knows, you would be my wife. It would give you a fresh start, a new name, a place where Victor Fletcher does not exist." Miriam stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want me to pretend to be your wife? You do not even know me." "I know enough." Franklin's voice was gentle. "I know you are running from a man who hurts you. I know you are desperate enough to walk 3 miles in the rain rather than spend another night under his roof. And I know that if I leave you here, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what happened to you." He took a step closer, his expression earnest. "I am not asking for anything from you, Miriam. This would be an arrangement of convenience, nothing more. You would have your own space, your own privacy. I would just be offering you protection and a way out." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Miriam whispered. Franklin looked away out the window at the morning street. 5 years ago, my sister married a man like Victor. Charming at first, then cruel. She tried to leave him twice, and both times he found her and brought her back. The third time, she did not survive the beating." His jaw tightened. "I swore after we buried Emily that I would never stand by and watch another woman suffer what she suffered. So this is not just for you, Miriam. This is for every woman who needs someone to stand between her and the monsters." Miriam felt tears burn behind her eyes, the first she had allowed herself in months. She thought of the baby growing inside her, the small life that deserved better than Victor Fletcher's fists. She thought of the years stretching ahead, always running, always hiding, always afraid. And she thought of this stranger who offered her salvation without asking for anything in return. "What about when he discovers I am with child?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she saw Franklin's eyes widen slightly. "I am 4 months along. Soon everyone will know. A pretend marriage will not help me if you did not know what you were agreeing to." Franklin absorbed this information in silence, and Miriam waited for him to withdraw his offer, to tell her he had not signed up to raise another man's child. But instead, he took off his hat, ran a hand through his dark hair, and met her eyes squarely. "That makes it even more important that we leave today," he said. A pregnant woman is harder to move, and Victor will be even more determined to find you if he knows about the baby. As for the child, anyone who asks will be told it is mine. We married hastily. The baby came early. People will gossip, but that is better than the alternative. You would do that. Miriam could barely speak around the tightness in her throat. You would claim another man's child as yours. A child is innocent of its father's sins, Franklin said firmly. And any baby you bring into this world will be loved and protected. I swear that to you. Not because I expect gratitude or repayment, but because it is the right thing to do. Miriam looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had been afraid to speak, and she made her choice. When do we leave? Within the hour, if you can be ready. I have already arranged for supplies, and my horse is strong enough to carry both of us until we can get you one of your own. Franklin settled his hat back on his head. Pack whatever you brought with you. Me will spread the word that you left town on the morning stage. With luck, Victor will chase you in the wrong direction. They were on the road south before the sun climbed above the treetops. Miriam seated in front of Franklin with her small bundle of possessions tied behind the saddle. Mrs. Chen had pressed food and a warm shawl into her hands, along with a fierce hug and whispered words of encouragement. The sheriff had watched their departure from the doorway of his office, his expression unreadable, but he had made no move to stop them. The miles passed in a rhythm of hoofbeats and creaking leather, the dense forests of Washington giving way gradually to different country. Franklin kept them to back roads and game trails when possible, avoiding towns where Victor might have sent telegrams or descriptions. They spoke little at first, Miriam too overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had done, Franklin respecting her need for silence. On the second day, as they stopped to rest the horse beside a creek, Franklin finally asked the question Miriam had been dreading. "Do you want to talk about him?" "About what happened?" Miriam sat on a fallen log, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Franklin had brewed over a small fire. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in 2 years, she did not feel afraid. "I met Victor at a church social in Olympia. I was 19, working as a seamstress. He was handsome and charming, and he said all the right things. My parents had died the year before, and I was alone in the world. He seemed like a gift from heaven." Franklin listened without interrupting, his attention focused entirely on her words. "The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after our wedding. I had burned the roast, and he said I needed to learn to be a better wife. I believed him. I thought it was my fault, that if I just tried harder was better, he would stop." Miriam's voice remained steady, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "But it was never enough. Everything I did was wrong. The way I spoke, the way I dressed, the way I breathed. He would go weeks without touching me in anger, and I would think it was over, that he had changed. Then something would set him off, and it would be worse than before." "Did you try to leave?" Franklin's question was gentle, without judgment. 3 times. "The first time I made it to my friend Sarah's house. Victor apologized, cried, swore it would never happen again. I believed him." Miriam smiled bitterly. "The second time, I got as far as the train station before he found me. He broke 2 of my ribs and locked me in the cellar for 3 days. The third time, I realized I was pregnant, and I knew I could not try again until I had a better plan. So I started hiding money, planning, waiting for the right moment." "When did you realize he would never change?" Franklin asked. "The night he told me that if I ever tried to leave again, he would hunt me down and kill me slowly enough that I would beg for death." Miriam met his eyes. "I believed him. I still believe him. That is why I am grateful for what you are doing, but I need you to understand the danger you are in. Victor Fletcher does not forgive, and he does not forget. If he finds us, he will try to kill you." Franklin was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I have faced down rustlers, outlaws, and men mad with gold fever. I have been shot at, stabbed, and left for dead in the desert. Victor Fletcher does not scare me, Miriam. The only thing that scares me is the thought of failing to protect someone who needs protection. They reached the border between Washington and Oregon on the 5th day of travel, crossing into a landscape that grew drier and more open as they moved south. Franklin had money enough for a second horse, and Miriam rode beside him now rather than in front of him, learning the rhythm of the animal beneath her, finding confidence in the reins. Her body still ached from Victor's last beating, but the bruises were fading, and the constant knot of fear in her stomach had begun to loosen. They stopped in a small town called Redmond, where Franklin purchased supplies and Miriam bought fabric for new dresses that would accommodate her growing belly. The woman who ran the general store smiled knowingly at Miriam's condition and offered congratulations, assuming Franklin was the father. Neither of them corrected her. "Does it bother you?" Miriam asked that night as they made camp under a sky full of stars. "Having people think the baby is yours." Franklin looked up from the fire he was building, his expression thoughtful. "Why would it bother me? I told you I would claim the child as mine, and I meant it. Far as anyone in Bend is concerned, we are Franklin and Miriam Rowe, married in Washington, expecting our first baby. That is the story, and that is the truth they will know. But it is not the truth." Miriam's hands rested on her belly, feeling the stronger movements now, kicks and rolls that reassured her the baby was growing well. "The truth is complicated," Franklin said. "The truth is that you are a brave woman who escaped a terrible situation, and I am a man who believes in doing what is right. The truth is that this baby deserves a father who will love it, and I intend to be that father in every way that matters, even if I did not plant the seed." He met her eyes across the fire. "Blood does not make family, Miriam. Love and commitment make family, and I am committed to you and this child for as long as you need me." Miriam felt something shift in her chest, a wall beginning to crumble. She had not expected kindness from a man, had not imagined that someone could offer protection without demanding something in return. Yet here was Franklin, day after day proving that not all men were like Victor, that some men kept their promises. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this. For saving my life." "You saved your own life when you ran," Franklin replied. "I just made the journey easier." They reached the ranch outside Bend in late September, as the aspens turned gold on the hillsides and the air carried the sharp scent of sagebrush. The riverside ranch sprawled across several thousand acres, running cattle and horses, and the main house stood white and proud against the backdrop of mountains. The owner, a man named Thomas Garrett, greeted Franklin warmly and showed only polite curiosity about his new wife. "We will put you in the foreman's house," Thomas said, gesturing to a tidy cabin set apart from the bunkhouse. "It is not fancy, but it is clean and private. The hands will respect your space." The cabin was indeed small, just 3 rooms, but it was clean and bright, with windows that looked out on the mountains and a stove that burned hot. Miriam stood in the center of the main room, tears streaming down her face, because it was the first place in 2 years that had felt like home. Franklin set down their bags and looked at her with concern. "What is wrong? If you do not like it, we can—" "It is perfect," Miriam interrupted, wiping her eyes. "I am sorry. I am just overwhelmed. This is more than I dreamed of." Franklin crossed to her slowly, telegraphing his movements so as not to startle her, and he gently touched her shoulder. "You are safe here, Miriam. I promise you that. This is your home for as long as you want it." The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt strange and precious. Franklin rose before dawn to work with the ranch hands, mending fences and moving cattle, training horses and managing the complex operations of the ranch. Miriam kept the cabin, learning to cook properly for the first time without the fear of Victor's criticism, tending a small garden and slowly, carefully, learning to trust the man she called husband. Franklin was endlessly patient with her skittishness, never raising his voice, never moving too quickly, always giving her space to retreat if she needed it. He slept on a bedroll on the floor of the main room, insisting she take the bedroom, and he never once suggested anything improper or inappropriate. He treated her with a courtesy and respect that she had thought existed only in storybooks. But more than that, he talked to her. In the evenings after supper, they would sit by the fire, and Franklin would tell her stories of his life before Centralia. He had been born in Texas, had worked cattle drives from the time he was 15, had seen most of the West in his years of drifting. He spoke of his family, of his sister Emily, whose death still haunted him, of the parents he had lost to fever when he was young. "I always thought I would settle down eventually," he said one night in October, as rain drummed on the cabin roof. "Find a good woman, have children, build something lasting, but I kept moving, kept telling myself I had time. After Emily died, I stopped believing I deserved those things. Felt like I had failed her so completely that I had no right to happiness." "You did not fail her," Miriam said quietly. "You could not have known what her husband would do." "I should have seen it." Franklin's voice was rough with old pain. "I should have protected her better. That is why when I saw you in Centralia, saw the bruises and the fear, I could not walk away. Emily needed someone to stand up for her, and no one did. I will not make that mistake again." Miriam reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand, the first time she had willingly touched him. Franklin went very still, his eyes meeting hers. "You are a good man, Franklin Rowe," Miriam said. "The best man I have ever known, and I am grateful every single day that you stopped to help a stranger." Franklin's fingers closed gently around hers, his touch warm and calloused from work. "You are not a stranger anymore, Miriam. You are my wife, at least as far as the world is concerned, and I find I am grateful for that, more than I expected to be." Something passed between them in that moment, a current of feeling that was more than friendship, less than love, but with the potential to become something profound. Miriam felt it like a spark catching tinder, and it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. As November arrived and her belly grew round and obvious, Miriam became part of the ranch community. The other wives welcomed her with practical advice and invitations to quilting circles, and if some of them counted months on their fingers and whispered about hasty marriages, they kept their judgments quiet. Franklin was respected among the hands, known as a fair boss and a skilled horseman, and that respect extended to his wife. Miriam found herself laughing again, a sound she had almost forgotten she could make. She found joy in small things. The way frost patterned the windows in the morning, the taste of fresh bread with butter, the feeling of the baby moving inside her. She found peace in the rhythm of ranch life, in knowing where Franklin was and when he would return, in the absolute certainty that he would never hurt her. And slowly, carefully, she found herself falling in love with the man who had saved her life. It happened in quiet moments. The way he smiled when he came in from a long day and found supper waiting, the gentle way he spoke to the horses he trained, the night he spent 2 hours helping her repair a torn dress without complaint. It was in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with an expression of wonder and protectiveness that made her heart flutter. It was in the way he talked to her belly in the evenings, telling the baby stories about the ranch and the mountains, promising the child a good life. She was terrified of these feelings, terrified that trusting another man would lead to more pain. But Franklin was nothing like Victor. Franklin kept his promises. Franklin was kind. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire, Miriam gathered her courage. "Franklin, can I ask you something personal?" He looked up from the piece of leather he was working, his expression open. "Of course. When you brought me here, you said this was an arrangement of convenience. You said you were not asking anything of me." She took a breath. "Is that still true?" Franklin set down his work, his full attention on her now. "Why do you ask?" "Because I need to know what you want from this," Miriam said. "What you expect. I need to know if this is truly just an arrangement or if you hope for something more." Franklin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. "When I made you that offer in Centralia, I meant every word. I was not asking for anything except the chance to help you. I did not expect anything in return, and I still do not." He paused. "But if you are asking whether my feelings have changed over these past months, then yes, they have." Miriam's heart hammered against her ribs. "Changed how? I have come to care for you, Miriam." Franklin's voice was steady and honest. "More than I intended to. I look forward to coming home at the end of the day because you are here. I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about work. I see you growing round with child, and I feel a fierce protectiveness and pride that has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with—" He stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have already fallen. I did not plan for it, did not expect it, but there it is." Miriam felt tears spill over, but they were not tears of fear or pain. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could ever feel this way about a man again, not after Victor, but you are nothing like him. You are gentle and kind and patient, and you make me feel safe. You make me feel like I matter." Franklin rose from his chair and came to kneel beside hers, taking both her hands in his. "You do matter, Miriam. You matter more than anything. And I swear to you, I will never give you cause to fear me. I will never raise my hand to you or speak to you with cruelty. I will spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are monsters if you will let me." "I believe you," Miriam said, and she realized with a shock that it was true. She believed him completely. "I trust you, Franklin. I did not think I would ever trust a man again, but I trust you." Franklin lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "Then we do not have to pretend any more," he said. "We can make this marriage real in every way. Not tonight, not until you are ready, but when you are ready I will be here. I will always be here." Miriam leaned forward and kissed him, a soft press of lips that held the promise of more. Franklin cupped her face gently, reverently, as if she were something precious, and when they broke apart, both of them were smiling. December brought snow to the mountains, and a new phase in their relationship. They moved slowly, learning each other with the care of people who had both been burned before. Franklin still slept in the main room, respecting Miriam's need for time and space. But now there were stolen kisses and held hands, whispered conversations late into the night. He read to her from the books he had collected over his years of drifting, his voice painting pictures of faraway places. She sewed clothes for the baby while he carved a cradle from pine, the shavings falling like golden snow around his boots. The ranch settled into winter routines, the work different but no less demanding. Franklin proved himself invaluable to Thomas Garrett, solving problems and managing the hands with quiet authority. The other men respected him, and more than one told Miriam she was lucky to have married such a good man. She agreed, though they could not know how literal that luck had been, on Christmas Eve, as snow fell soft and silent outside the cabin. Franklin gave Miriam a small wrapped package. Inside was a gold ring, simple and unadorned, sized to fit her finger. "I know we did not have a proper wedding," Franklin said, suddenly shy. "And I know this marriage started as a fiction, but my feelings for you are real, Miriam. Real enough that I wanted to give you a ring that means something. If you will have it." Miriam slipped the ring onto her finger where it caught the firelight and gleamed. "It is beautiful. And yes, I will have it. I will have you, Franklin Rowe, for as long as you will have me." "Then you are stuck with me forever," Franklin said, pulling her close, careful of her swollen belly. "Because I am not going anywhere." They made their marriage real that night, coming together with a gentleness and care that brought tears to Miriam's eyes. Franklin touched her like she was spun glass, reverent and careful, and when she wept, he held her and whispered that she was safe, that he loved her, that nothing would ever hurt her again. It was nothing like the rough, painful experiences she had endured with Victor. This was tender and slow and full of love, a physical expression of the bond they had built over months of trust. Afterward, lying in Franklin's arms with the baby kicking between them, Miriam felt a peace she had never known. This was what marriage was supposed to be: partnership and respect and love. This was what she had dreamed of as a girl before Victor had taught her to dream of nothing but escape. "Are you happy?" Franklin murmured against her hair. "Happier than I have ever been," Miriam replied truthfully. "I did not think happiness was possible for me anymore. Thank you for proving me wrong." January 1883 arrived with bitter cold and deep snow, isolating the ranch from town. Miriam was 8 months pregnant now, moving slowly but still capable, and the baby's arrival felt both imminent and impossibly far away. Franklin had arranged for a midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Shaw, who lived on a neighboring ranch, but the snow made Miriam nervous about whether the woman would be able to reach them when the time came. "Do not worry," Franklin assured her, his hand resting on her belly to feel the baby kick. "If the snow is too deep, I will deliver this baby myself. I have helped with dozens of foals and calves. How different can it be?" "Very different," Miriam said, but she was laughing. Franklin had a way of making everything seem manageable, even the terrifying prospect of childbirth. "Besides," Franklin continued, pressing a kiss to her temple, "this baby is strong. I can feel it. Strong like its mother." The reminder that the baby was not biologically his hung unspoken between them for a moment, but Franklin showed no sign of caring. He had claimed this child as his own in every way that mattered, talking to Miriam's belly, making plans for their future as a family. The baby's true paternity was a fact, but it was not a truth that held any weight for either of them. The labor started on a Tuesday morning in late January, as the sun rose pink and cold over the mountains. Miriam woke to pain rippling across her belly and knew immediately what it meant. Franklin, who had developed an uncanny ability to sense when she needed him, was awake and alert before she could speak. "Is it time?" he asked, already moving to stoke the fire, to heat water, to prepare the cabin for what was to come. "I think so," Miriam managed, breathing through the contraction. "The pains are still far apart, but yes, today or tonight this baby is coming." Franklin sent one of the hands racing through the snow to fetch Mrs. Shaw, then returned to Miriam's side, holding her hand through each contraction, offering encouragement and water and whatever comfort he could provide. The hours passed in a blur of pain and effort, and when Mrs. Shaw finally arrived in the early afternoon, Miriam had never been more grateful to see another woman. "You are doing fine, dear," Mrs. Shaw said, examining her with brisk efficiency. "First babies take their time, but everything is progressing as it should. You have a few hours yet." Those hours were the longest of Miriam's life. The pain built in waves, each one stronger than the last, until she felt certain she would break apart. But Franklin never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, telling her she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. His presence anchored her, gave her something to hold on to when the pain threatened to sweep her away. As the sun set and the cabin filled with lamplight, the baby finally decided to make its appearance. Mrs. Shaw coached Miriam through the final pushes, and Franklin supported her from behind, his arms around her, lending her his strength. And then, with a final tremendous effort, the baby slipped into the world, wailing its displeasure at the cold and the light. "It is a boy," Mrs. Shaw announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket and placing him in Miriam's arms. "A big, healthy boy with excellent lungs." Miriam looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms and felt a wave of love so powerful it stole her breath. The baby had dark hair like Victor, but his eyes, when they opened, were a startling clear blue, and his features were still too new to show whose they favored. It did not matter. He was hers, and he was perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." Franklin leaned over her shoulder, his expression full of wonder as he looked at the baby. "He is beautiful, Miriam, perfect. Do you want to hold him?" Miriam asked, and when Franklin nodded, she carefully transferred the bundle into his arms. Franklin held the baby with surprising confidence, supporting the tiny head, his large hands gentle and sure. "Hello, son," he said softly. "I am your father. I will love you and protect you every day of your life. That is my promise to you." The baby, perhaps responding to the deep rumble of Franklin's voice, quieted and seemed to look up at him with solemn, unfocused eyes. Something passed between them, an unspoken bond forming, and Miriam knew with absolute certainty that Franklin meant every word of his promise. After Mrs. Shaw had cleaned up and departed into the snowy night, after Miriam had been settled in bed with the baby nursing at her breast, Franklin sat beside them and asked, "What should we name him?" Miriam had thought about this for months, had considered a dozen names, but looking at the baby now, only one felt right. "Matthew," she said. "Matthew Franklin Rowe, if that is acceptable to you." Franklin's eyes went bright with unshed tears. "Matthew, yes, that is perfect." The next weeks passed in the exhausting blur of new parenthood. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still woke every few hours to eat, and Miriam learned the bone-deep tiredness that came with caring for an infant. Franklin helped whenever he could, changing diapers and walking Matthew around the cabin when he fussed, singing off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby better than anything else. "You are a natural father," Miriam told him one night, watching as he settled Matthew back into the cradle Franklin had made. "I had good teachers," Franklin replied, tucking the blanket around the sleeping baby. "My mother before she died, and Emily, she was wonderful with children. I always thought she would have half a dozen of her own." His expression went distant with old grief. "I wish she could have met Matthew. She would have loved him." Miriam rose from the bed and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. "I wish I could have known her. She raised a good man." Franklin held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "We are going to give Matthew a good life, Miriam. The kind of life where he never has to be afraid, where he knows he is loved every single day. The kind of life Emily wanted for her children but never got to have." "We will," Miriam agreed. "Together." Spring came to Oregon with wildflowers and green hills, and the ranch burst into new life. Matthew was 3 months old, growing plump and alert. his eyes turning from blue to a warm hazel that was neither Miriam's green nor Victor's brown, but something uniquely his own. He smiled readily and laughed at Franklin's silly faces, and he was so clearly loved by everyone on the ranch that Miriam sometimes forgot to worry about the past. But the past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. It was a warm day in April when the stranger rode onto the ranch. Miriam was hanging laundry behind the cabin, Matthew sleeping in a basket at her feet, when she heard the unfamiliar voice asking for the foreman. Something in the tone made her freeze, made the hair on the back of her neck stand up in warning. She gathered Matthew and slipped inside the cabin, closing the door quietly, her heart suddenly pounding. Through the window, she could see the stranger talking to Franklin by the corral, a tall man with a hard face. They spoke for several minutes, and then the stranger handed Franklin something that looked like a piece of paper before riding away. Franklin stood very still for a long moment after the man left, staring down at whatever he held. Then he turned and walked toward the cabin, his expression grim. Miriam met him at the door, Matthew clutched to her chest. Who was that? What did he want? Franklin came inside and closed the door behind him, leaning against it as if to bar entry to the world. He held up the paper, which Miriam could now see was a wanted poster. On it was a crude sketch that looked enough like her to make her stomach drop, and beneath it, words in bold print. Wanted for desertion. Reward for information leading to the return of Miriam Fletcher to her lawful husband. Victor is looking for you, Franklin said flatly. He has been distributing these throughout Oregon and Washington. That man was a bounty hunter, asking if anyone on the ranch matched the description. I told him I had not seen anyone like that. Miriam sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. He found us. Oh God, Franklin, he found us. He has not found us yet, Franklin corrected, kneeling in front of her. He knows you are somewhere in Oregon, probably, but the poster describes Miriam Fletcher, a woman traveling alone. It says nothing about a woman with a husband and baby, nothing about someone named Miriam Rowe. As long as we are careful, as long as no one from Centralia happens through and recognizes you, we should be safe. Should be, Miriam repeated, hearing the uncertainty in those words. But if he keeps looking, if he offers enough money, then we will deal with it, Franklin said firmly. I am not going to let him take you, Miriam. I swore to protect you and Matthew, and that is exactly what I will do. But the fear had found Miriam again, the cold knot of terror that had loosened over the past months now tightening once more. She started at unexpected sounds, watched the road with anxious eyes, kept Matthew close at all times. Franklin noticed, of course, and tried to reassure her, but they both knew the truth. Victor Fletcher was relentless, and if he truly wanted to find her, he might eventually succeed. Summer came hot and dry, and the ranch work intensified. Franklin was often gone from dawn until long after dark, working roundup and branding, managing the complex dance of keeping a cattle operation running. Miriam tried to maintain normalcy, caring for Matthew, tending her garden, visiting with the other ranch wives. But the fear was always there, a shadow at the edge of her vision. In July, another stranger came to the ranch asking questions. This one was more subtle, posing as a traveling peddler, but Miriam saw through the disguise. She kept to the cabin while Franklin dealt with him, her hands shaking as she held Matthew. We cannot keep doing this, she told Franklin that night, after the stranger had been sent away empty-handed. Every person who comes asking is another chance that someone will recognize me, that someone will tell Victor where to find me. Maybe I should leave, go somewhere else, somewhere farther away. No, Franklin's voice was hard as stone. I am not sending you away. We are a family, Miriam. Where you go, I go. Where Matthew goes, we both go. We stay together. But you have a job here, a good life. I have a job lots of places, Franklin interrupted. And the only good life is one where we are together. Thomas will understand if I need to move on. Hell, he already suspects something is not quite right with our story, though he has been too polite to say so. Miriam looked at this man who had become everything to her. Husband, protector, father to her child, love of her life. The thought of leaving him was unbearable, but so was the thought of putting him in danger. I am afraid, she admitted in a whisper. I am so afraid that Victor will find us, that he will hurt you, that he will take Matthew. I cannot stop being afraid. Franklin pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I am afraid too, he confessed. I am afraid of failing to protect you the way I failed to protect Emily. But fear does not mean we give up. It means we fight harder, plan better. It means we do whatever we have to do to keep our family safe. The decision was made for them in August. Thomas Garrett called Franklin into his office and, with obvious regret, explained that he had been approached by a private detective asking about a woman matching Miriam's description. Thomas had denied any knowledge, but he was concerned. I do not know what trouble you are running from, Franklin, and I do not need to know, Thomas said. You are a good man and a good worker, and I trust your judgment. But if men are actively searching for your wife, this ranch may not be safe for you anymore. I am not asking you to leave, but I wanted you to have all the information. Franklin came home that evening with the news, and he and Miriam spent the night making plans. They would leave Oregon, head east into Idaho or Montana, find another ranch or a town where they could disappear. Franklin had some money saved, enough to get them settled somewhere new. They would change their names again if they had to, start over as many times as necessary. But before they could leave, Victor Fletcher himself arrived in Bend. Miriam was in town with Matthew, buying supplies when she saw him. He was older, harder, with more gray in his hair than she remembered, but it was unmistakably Victor, standing outside the sheriff's office with an official-looking man in a city suit. Her heart stopped, and for a moment she could not move, could not breathe, could only stare at the nightmare she had thought she escaped. Then instinct took over and she turned away, keeping her head down, her body between Victor and Matthew. She walked quickly toward where their wagon was tied, praying he had not seen her, praying she could get away before he recognized her. But luck was not with her. Miriam, Victor's voice cut across the street like a whip. Miriam Fletcher, I know that is you. She ran then, clutching Matthew to her chest, running for the wagon and the horse and any hope of escape. But Victor was faster, crossing the distance between them in long strides, his hand closing around her arm in a grip that brought back every nightmare, every beating, every moment of terror from her old life. You stupid woman, Victor hissed, his face close to hers, his breath sour with drink. Did you think you could run from me? Did you think I would not find you? Let me go. Miriam tried to pull away, but his grip was iron and Matthew was screaming, sensing her fear. Is that my son? Victor's eyes went to the baby, and something ugly twisted in his expression. You were pregnant and you did not tell me. You ran away carrying my child. He is not yours, Miriam spat, finding courage in her rage. You have no right to him, no right to me. Let me go, or I swear I will scream until everyone in this town comes running. Scream all you want, Victor said, his smile cruel. I have the law on my side. You are my wife, and that makes the baby mine too. I am taking you both back to Washington, and if you fight me, I will make sure you regret it. The lady said, let her go. Franklin's voice was cold and deadly, and Miriam looked up to see him standing 10 feet away, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. She had never seen him look like this. Hard and dangerous, every inch the gunfighter he had presumably been in his younger years. "Release her now, or we are going to have a problem." Victor turned, still gripping Miriam's arm, his expression incredulous. "Who the hell are you?" "I am Franklin Rowe, Miriam's husband, and you need to take your hands off my wife right now." "Her husband?" Victor laughed, an ugly sound. "She is already married to me. I have the certificate to prove it. This woman is a deserter and a thief, and I am taking her home. She is not going anywhere with you." Franklin took a step closer, and his voice dropped to a register that promised violence. "You beat her, terrorized her, made her life hell. She ran because staying with you would have killed her. Now you are going to let her go, get on your horse, and ride out of Bend. If you ever come near her or our son again, I will put you in the ground. That is not a threat. That is a promise." Victor's face went red with rage. "You are harboring a fugitive, and I will see you arrested for it. Sheriff." He turned toward the office, calling for the lawman. "Sheriff, this man is preventing me from retrieving my legal property." The sheriff, a weathered man named Dalton, emerged from his office with the air of someone who had been hoping to avoid this confrontation. "Now, gentlemen, let us all calm down. Mr. Fletcher, you say this woman is your wife." "She is," Victor said triumphantly. "I have the marriage certificate right here. She ran away 7 months ago, and I have been searching for her ever since. This man has been harboring her, probably telling people the baby is his when it is obviously mine." Sheriff Dalton looked at Franklin. "Is this true? Is the woman you call your wife legally married to this man?" Franklin held the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Miriam was married to Victor Fletcher once, yes. But that marriage ended the night he beat her so badly she thought she would die, the night she ran for her life with nothing but the clothes on her back. She is married to me now, in every way that matters, and I am not going to let him hurt her again." "The law does not care about your feelings," Victor snarled. "She is mine, and you have no right to keep her from me." Sheriff Dalton looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Mr. Rowe, much as I hate to say it, the law is on Mr. Fletcher's side here. A woman cannot just leave her husband because he is unkind. She belongs to him legally until death or a judge says otherwise." "Then the law is wrong," Franklin said flatly, echoing the words he had spoken to the sheriff in Centralia so many months ago. "And I do not care. Miriam is not property. She is a human being with the right to safety and freedom. I will not let you force her back into a situation where she and our son are in danger." "Your son?" Victor's voice dripped venom. "That baby is mine, conceived in my marriage bed, and I will take him with me when I take her." "You have no legal claim to either of them." Something in Franklin's expression went very cold and very still. "If you try to take that baby, I will kill you where you stand. Sheriff, you can arrest me for it afterward if you want, but the man will be dead, and the woman and child will be safe. That is the only outcome that matters to me." The street had gone very quiet, townspeople gathering to watch the confrontation. Sheriff Dalton looked from Franklin to Victor to Miriam, who stood frozen with Matthew crying in her arms, and his weathered face showed the conflict of a man caught between law and justice. "Mr. Fletcher," the sheriff said slowly, "maybe you should consider letting this go. It has been 7 months. You have clearly managed without your wife. The baby is healthy and cared for. Maybe it is better to just leave well enough alone and go home." "I will not leave without what is mine," Victor insisted. "I want my wife and my son, and I want this man arrested for interfering in my marriage. Do your job, Sheriff, or I will report you to the territorial authorities." Sheriff Dalton's jaw tightened. "Mr. Rowe, I am going to have to ask you to step back and let Mr. Fletcher take his wife." "I do not like it, but the law is the law." "No," Franklin did not move. "I told you I am not letting him take her. You will have to arrest me first." Do not be a fool, son. I do not want to, then do not. Franklin's voice was steel. Look at her, Sheriff. Really look at her. Look at how terrified she is, how she is shaking. You think a woman shakes like that because her husband is unkind. He beat her. Probably worse than that. And if you let him take her, you are signing her death warrant. Sheriff Dalton did look at Miriam then, and she saw the moment his resolve wavered. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand, tears streaming down her face, her body instinctively curved around Matthew to protect him. Whatever the sheriff saw in her expression, it seemed to decide him. Mr. Fletcher, I am going to give you one chance to walk away from this peacefully, Sheriff Dalton said. You can ride out of Bend today, and I will consider this matter closed. If you refuse, I will detain you for disturbing the peace while I investigate the allegations of abuse. Your choice. Victor's face went purple with rage. You cannot do this. The law gives me discretion in how I handle domestic matters, the sheriff interrupted. And my discretion is telling me that Mrs. Rowe is where she belongs, with a man who clearly loves and protects her. Now mount up and ride out, or I will lock you in a cell until you cool down. For a moment, Miriam thought Victor would refuse, would force a confrontation that could only end in violence. But whatever he saw in the sheriff's eyes, in Franklin's stance, in the gathered crowd that was clearly on Miriam's side, made him reconsider. He released Miriam's arm with a shove that nearly sent her stumbling, and he pointed a finger at Franklin. This is not over, Victor promised, his voice shaking with fury. I will go to the territorial governor if I have to. I will file charges. I will make sure everyone knows you are a thief and an adulterer, and I will get my wife back. That is my vow to you. Get off my street, Sheriff Dalton said wearily. Before I change my mind about being lenient. Victor stalked to his horse and mounted with violence in every movement. He rode out of Bend at a gallop, and Miriam watched him go with tears of relief streaming down her face. Franklin came to her immediately, wrapping his arms around her and Matthew, holding them both as she shook. It is okay, he murmured against her hair. It is okay, you are safe, I have got you. He is right, Miriam said when she could speak. He will not stop. He will keep coming after me, keep trying to drag me back. Sheriff Dalton approached, his expression troubled. Mrs. Rowe, I bought you some time, but I cannot protect you indefinitely if your husband pursues this through legal channels. My advice would be to get yourselves a lawyer and file for a divorce on grounds of cruelty. It is a long shot, but if you can prove he abused you, a judge might grant it. In the meantime, you should probably consider relocating to somewhere less obvious. We will be gone within the week, Franklin said. Thank you for standing with us, Sheriff. I know it was not easy. No law should force a woman to stay with a man who hurts her, Sheriff Dalton said simply. I do not care what the books say. That is not right, and I will not enforce it if I can help it. You take care of her, Mr. Rowe. She deserves better than what life has given her so far. I will, Franklin promised. Every day of my life. They left Bend 3 days later, after settling their affairs and saying goodbye to Thomas Garrett and the friends they had made. Thomas gave Franklin a generous severance and a letter of recommendation that made no mention of the drama that had precipitated their departure, and he shook Franklin's hand with genuine regret. You ever need work, you come back, Thomas said. A man who stands up for his family the way you did. That is a man I want on my ranch. They traveled north this time, back into Washington but far from Centralia, into the Okanogan country where the land was wilder and the settlements more scattered. Franklin found work at a ranch outside a tiny town called Conconally, and they rented a small house on the edge of the property. The owner, an elderly couple named Henderson, asked few questions, and seemed content to have reliable help. Matthew was 8 months old now, sitting up and babbling, and Miriam devoted herself to being the mother she had feared she would never have the chance to be. She taught him to clap his hands, delighted in his laughter, and marveled at how much he looked like Franklin when he smiled, despite sharing no blood. Love, it seemed, could shape a child as much as genetics. Fall came again, completing a full year since Miriam had fled Centralia, and with it came a letter that changed everything. Franklin had hired a lawyer in Bend, a young man fresh from law school who believed in causes and reform. The lawyer had filed for a divorce on Miriam's behalf, citing extreme cruelty and abandonment of marital duties. It was a long shot, as Sheriff Dalton had warned, but the lawyer was optimistic. The letter explained that Victor Fletcher had contested the divorce and countersued for loss of consortium and desertion. But the lawyer had found 3 people in Centralia willing to testify about Victor's violence, including Mrs. Chen from the boarding house. He was building a case, and he thought they had a chance. A chance, Miriam repeated, reading the letter for the 3rd time. After everything, we might actually have a chance at making this right, at making our marriage legal. It is already legal in every way that matters, Franklin said, but his eyes were bright with hope. But yes, it would be good to have a piece of paper that says so. Good for you, good for Matthew. No one could ever question his legitimacy or your right to be my wife. The divorce proceedings dragged on through the winter, conducted by letters and telegrams, an endless series of depositions and testimony. Victor fought every step, but the evidence of his cruelty was overwhelming, and even the law in 1883 recognized that a man who beat his wife bloody had violated his marriage vows. In February of 1884, almost exactly 2 years after Miriam had fled into the rain-soaked night, a judge in Olympia granted her a divorce. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Miriam read it 3 times before she believed it was real. She was free. Legally, officially free. Victor Fletcher no longer had any claim on her or Matthew. The nightmare was finally, truly over. When Franklin came home that evening, she met him at the door with tears streaming down her face and the telegram clutched in her hand. He read it, and his face broke into a smile so wide and joyful that it transformed him, made him look young and unguarded. "You are free," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Miriam, you are free." "We are free," she corrected, throwing her arms around his neck. "Both of us. We can finally stop running, stop looking over our shoulders. We can just live." They were married again, properly this time, in the small church in Conconally with the Hendersons as witnesses and Matthew perched on Franklin's hip throughout the ceremony. Miriam wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with white lace, and Franklin wore his Sunday best. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed her with a passion that made the preacher cough discreetly and the Hendersons chuckle, and Miriam felt like she was floating. "Now it is real," Franklin murmured against her lips. "Now no one can ever say you are not truly mine." "I was always yours," Miriam replied. "From the moment you offered me that handkerchief in Centralia, I was yours. The paperwork just made it official." They held a small celebration at the house, and their neighbors came bearing food and gifts and good wishes. Matthew, now a year old and walking with wobbly determination, was the center of attention, and Miriam watched with a full heart as Franklin showed him off with the pride of any father. No one looking at them would ever guess that Matthew was not Franklin's biological son. The bond between them was too strong, too obvious. They were father and son in every way that mattered. Spring came again, and with it came news that Victor Fletcher had died in a logging accident in Centralia. Miriam received the letter from the lawyer with mixed feelings. She felt no grief for the man who had terrorized her, but she felt a strange hollowness at the finality of it. Victor was gone, could never threaten her again, and while that was a relief, it also felt anticlimactic. She had built him up into such a monster in her mind that his mundane death in an accident seemed insufficient somehow. "He cannot hurt you anymore," Franklin said that night, holding her in the darkness of their bedroom. "He is gone, and we are here, and we have our whole lives ahead of us." "I know," Miriam said, "and I am glad he is gone, but I also feel guilty for being glad. Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you human," Franklin replied. "You do not have to feel anything you do not feel, Miriam. You do not have to mourn a man who hurt you just because society says you should. Your feelings are your own, and they are valid, whatever they are." That summer, Miriam discovered she was pregnant again. She had hoped for more children, had wanted to give Matthew siblings, but a part of her had worried that her body was somehow marked by Victor's violence, that she would struggle to conceive again. The pregnancy was easy, so different from the fear-soaked months carrying Matthew that it felt like a gift. Franklin was delighted, talking to her belly every night, telling the baby stories about the world waiting outside. "Boy or girl, it does not matter," he said one evening in September, his hand resting on her swollen stomach. "I will love this child just as much as I love Matthew, just as much as I love any children we are blessed with." "I think it is a girl this time," Miriam said. "I do not know why, but I feel different than I did with Matthew." She was right. Their daughter was born in late March of 1885, arriving with a minimum of fuss and a loud voice that suggested she would be a force to be reckoned with. They named her Emily after Franklin's sister, and when Franklin held his daughter for the first time, he wept openly. "She would have loved to meet you," he whispered to the tiny baby. "She would have been so proud to have you named after her." Miriam watched her husband bond with their daughter, watched him love both of his children with equal fervor, and she marveled at the life they had built. 3 years ago, she had been a woman with no hope, convinced she would die at the hands of a brutal man. Now she was a wife and mother, loved and safe, with a future bright with possibility. The years passed in the gentle rhythm of family life. Matthew grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and do the 100 tasks required on a ranch. Emily was her mother's shadow, helping with cooking and gardening, learning to sew and can and keep a home. Franklin moved up from ranch hand to foreman to partner in the operation, his skill and reliability earning him a stake in the land he worked. They bought their own small spread eventually, 100 acres with a creek running through it, and they built a house with their own hands, big enough for the family they hoped to continue growing. 2 more children came in the following years, another boy named Thomas and a daughter named Charlotte. The house was full of laughter and chaos, of children's voices and the smell of fresh bread, of love that grew stronger with every passing season. Miriam sometimes thought about the woman she had been, the terrified girl hiding her belly and running through the rain, and she could hardly believe that was her. She had become someone new, someone strong and confident, someone who knew she was loved. Franklin aged well, silver threading through his dark hair, lines deepening around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun and smiling at his children. He never raised his voice in anger, never lifted his hand in violence, never gave Miriam cause to fear him. He was exactly the man he had promised to be all those years ago in Centralia. Steadfast, kind, protective. He was the foundation upon which their family was built, and Miriam thanked God for him every single day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played in the yard. Matthew was 11 now, tall and lanky, helping Emily and Thomas build something elaborate with sticks and string. Charlotte, the baby at 3 years old, toddled between them, more hindrance than help but included with patient affection. "You remember the first time you saw me?" Miriam asked, leaning against Franklin's solid warmth. "I remember thinking you looked like a scared rabbit," Franklin said with a smile, ready to bolt at the slightest sound. "And I remember wanting to help you, even though I did not know why. Just knew you needed someone and I happened to be there." "You saved my life," Miriam said simply. "You and Matthew and all of this, it exists because you decided to help a stranger. I will never stop being grateful for that." Franklin turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You saved yourself, Miriam. You were the one brave enough to run, smart enough to hide, strong enough to survive. I just gave you a safe place to land. Everything else you built yourself." "We built it together," Miriam corrected. "You and me and these 4 beautiful children. We built this life together, and it is more than I ever dreamed possible." Franklin kissed her, slow and sweet, a kiss that still made her heart flutter even after 10 years of marriage. "I love you, Miriam Rowe. I will love you until the day I die, and beyond if such things are possible." "I love you too," Miriam replied, and she knew the words had never been more true. "Thank you for being brave enough to help a woman in trouble. Thank you for being the man you are." They stood together as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, their children's laughter ringing in the evening air, and Miriam felt a peace so complete it was almost painful. She had survived the worst things a woman could endure, had run through darkness and fear, had hidden her growing belly from cruel hands. But the cowboy had said, "Bring that baby here safe," and he had kept his promise. He had brought them both to safety, had given them a life worth living, had shown them what love was supposed to look like. And now, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had nurtured, Miriam finally allowed herself to believe that happy endings were real. Not because they were easy or perfect or without struggle, but because they were fought for, protected, and cherished. This was her happy ending. A good man, beautiful children, a home full of warmth and laughter, and the knowledge that she was finally, truly free. The future stretched ahead of them, full of seasons yet to come, children yet to grow, grandchildren yet to be born. But in this moment, standing on the porch with Franklin's arms around her and her children playing in the yard, Miriam had everything she needed. She had safety. She had love. She had home, and she had survived,